Good morning, everyone. My name is Chris Murphy. I have the honor of representing Connecticut in the United States Senate here with my senior senator, Dick Blumenthal. We are here to talk about the fact that COVID is still a nightmare in this country, and the leader of the Senate, Mitch McConnell, is pretending that everything's back to normal. I love being here in Connecticut. I love working in this building behind me. I love traveling the state. But we should be in Washington, D.C. right now, passing legislation to fund our schools, to fund a national testing program, to stop our states from going into bankruptcy, and to save the post office. Senator McConnell sent the Senate home for August, and the consequence is potential disaster for this country. And so we are going to continue to press Senator McConnell every single week that we are back here in Washington to get the Senate back into session. And here are a few reasons why. Our schools are reopening to various degrees here in Connecticut, but they don't have the resources to do it the right way. Our schools are not going to have enough money this year in order to be able to hire the extra teachers that they need to do hybrid systems right, to lease the new space they need in order to bring more kids back into the classroom, to buy the PPE and cleaning supplies that they need. Our state is going to run out of money. Revenues aren't coming in because the economy was shut down completely for so long, and our state budget is not going to balance next year without some additional federal money, and that means tax increases for people in Connecticut. Our post office is running out of money. I just left a bunch of Postal Service employees in Middletown, and already the mail has been slowed down. There's a question as to whether absentee ballots are going to be able to be delivered on time. Our post office needs emergency funding. And lastly, we are starting to see shortages of PPE again. We are starting to see testing turnaround times expand. There is no way to get this virus under control unless we nationalize the system of medical supply in this country, from these masks to the testing machines that are deployed all across our state. We need emergency COVID legislation to fix the supply chain debacle that still plagues our nation. This president is going to try to use his Twitter feed to distract the nation on a daily basis, to try to create some new controversy every 24 hours between now and the election, to try to make people forget the fact that we have 5% of the world's population and 25% of the world's COVID cases. There's no amount of stimulus you can provide this economy if we don't beat the virus, and it is still expanding in big parts of this country, and we can't beat it without additional federal legislation. So my call on Senator McConnell is to bring the Senate back so we can debate the House bill, or bring up legislation of his own. Now, the legislation he introduced doesn't do the job, but at the very least, he should bring that bill up for a debate in the Senate and let us try to amend it and make it better. We shouldn't be back in our states right now. We should be on the Senate floor trying to pass this legislation. Now, Senator McConnell has a problem because half of his caucus doesn't want to vote for any additional funding. They just want to let the country burn down. Well, let's force those Republicans who don't want any more money for testing, no money for schools, to make that case on the floor of the Senate. Bring the Senate back, bring up a bill for debate, let Senator Blumenthal and I offer amendments that will make it better, and let's see which side wins. The cost of doing nothing is catastrophic for our kids, for our communities, and for this upcoming election. So I know we sometimes sound like a broken record, but we're not going to stop making this case until the Senate gets back to work and does its job. Senator Blumenthal.
Thank you. Like Senator Murphy, I've been listening to the people of Connecticut. I've been traveling to every corner of Connecticut over the last 3 weeks. And what I'm seeing and hearing is a time of trauma, hurt, loss, and fear. Fear about our future. We're not talking here about just an ordinary time of difficulty. We are now entering a true economic depression. It's no longer a big recession. It is a historic depression that will produce economic trauma every bit as serious as 1929. We are entering an unparalleled time of pain and loss for our nation as we pass the 170,000 death mark. And here in Connecticut, there is no way we can count ourselves immune from a second wave of healthcare trauma. We're also in the midst of a well-justified reckoning on racial injustice. The kind of hurt, loss, and trauma that we are seeing in our economy and healthcare is going to cause unprecedented chaos and confusion if we fail to address it, if our government continues in dysfunction. So my message to Mitch McConnell is, do your job. Let us do our job. We have a responsibility here to vote, to act, to address this potential economic depression and healthcare and democratic implosion. We can begin with a very, very simple vote. Delivering for America. That act was passed on Saturday by the House of Representatives. It would stop the purposeful sabotage of our mail system with a not-so-hidden agenda that is Trump's watchword. Number one, to privatize the mails, and number two, to steal the election. The Washington Post reported this morning that 534,000 mailed ballots were disqualified in 23 states during the primary. That is a fraction of the kind of undercounting we will see in this upcoming election without the kind of strong action that delivering our mails, the House-passed measure, will provide. Not just the $25 billion, but reversing the cutbacks in overtime, the dismantling of collection boxes and other kinds of equipment like sorting machines. We need to not only provide more money to sustain the mails, but also to reverse and roll back the cuts and downsizing that are the cause of the ongoing delays. People are seeing those delays in real time. And they affect not just the mail of ballots, but also prescription drugs for our veterans, Social Security payments for our seniors, other kinds of bills and payments for small businesses, supplies and equipment across the board. They are sabotaging not just the mails, but our economy. And I want to agree with with Senator Murphy. You know, our children going back to school in one form or another. Our schools need to be made safe. That's the reason that we need to pass the HEROES Act to provide aid for state and local governments so our schools can be made safe. We need to provide more PPE, protective equipment for our teachers, but also for hospital workers, and assistance for the clinics to prepare for the possible next wave. We think it's coming. And aid for our small businesses, still struggling. Many of them still hanging on by a thread. More PPP, the Paycheck Protection Program, that has been a lifeline to many of these small businesses. We know what has to be done. There's no reason for the McConnell pause, as he called it. We know it has to be done now. And especially what I have heard from the people of Connecticut is we cannot reopen our economy, we cannot have people go back to work or even kids to school without childcare. Childcare is essential. That's actually the name of the bill. Childcare is essential. I've helped to lead that bill. Senator Warren talked about it, in effect, in her convention speech. Childcare is essential to people going back to work and teachers going back to teaching. And so the $7 billion in the HEROES Act, as well as the $50 billion in the Child Care is Essential Act, are both important. And I'll just close on this note. The Hartford Courant had a report yesterday. It's really a simple number that I found absolutely chilling. Opioid overdose deaths are up 22%. Opioid overdose deaths are dramatically and astronomically increasing. And the reason is quite simply lack of mental health care, the increased stress and anxiety of this very traumatic time. Opioid overdose deaths are the canary in the mine that show us that mental health must be a priority because our teenagers are grappling with unparalleled trauma and stress and anxiety. And the coping mechanisms have been disrupted. The counseling services have been interrupted, and the stress and anxiety have increased. We are approaching another opioid spike, reflecting a separate epidemic of substance abuse. So our country really is at a crossroads. We're at a very dramatic and historic crossroads that will coincide with an election. And people will make choices in this election. But right now, we have a choice that's fundamental to the health and well-being of the people of Connecticut and our country, which is, will we vote to stop this ongoing healthcare crisis, economic crisis, and racial injustice crisis? And they all are inseparably linked. We must address them all together. Mitch McConnell should schedule the vote this week. We never should have left. This week, we should act.
Can you take questions?
On the unemployment extension, you didn't mention the 600 specifically. I mean, you haven't given up on that, but realistically, tell us what is the latest on that? I mean, neither Trump nor the Republicans have been on board on the 600 number, obviously, at all. But what is the latest on that, and what is the outlook on that?
Listen, I have no idea why you'd be interested in cutting people's unemployment in the middle of a pandemic that's still raging. The fact of the matter is these were intended to be emergency benefits that would last for the duration of the crisis, and the crisis has not abated. So to cut people's unemployment benefits right now is to, end up with starving kids and folks who are going to get foreclosed out of a home or evicted out of an apartment. The latest version of the Senate bill would reduce people's unemployment benefits by $300 per week. I mean, in Connecticut, that's catastrophic. The average unemployment benefit prior to this crisis in Connecticut was around $380 a week. That just doesn't pay the rent and keep your lights on and put food on the table. The additional benefit allowed families in Connecticut to remain whole. And even a $300 cut, never mind a $600 cut, are going to really jeopardize the health and safety of a lot of families here. So, I mean, is there room to have a conversation about what the right number is? Sure, but I can't support cutting people's unemployment checks by $300 per week in the middle of a pandemic. We're going to have to do better than that if there's going to be substantial bipartisan support, and that remains, a really important issue for both of us.
Yeah, I think a $300 cut is simply off the table. Our proposal is actually to reduce the unemployment amount by $100 when the unemployment rate comes down. Tie unemployment insurance to what is actually happening in employment. If the unemployment rate drops below 11%, then we can talk about reducing unemployment insurance, but not until we see a material improvement in jobs and employment. We should not be slashing unemployment insurance at exactly the time that consumers have stopped spending, because that's the reason that consumer demand has continued even during this time of unprecedented trauma. So there are rational, smart, strategic ways to reduce the levels of unemployment insurance. Going to $300 is economic suicide for the whole economy. And it is just abject cruelty to American families that will be unable to put food on the table, pay their rent, clothe their children, and send them back to school.
Also, what is the latest on Trump's executive order? Is there a legal challenge to that? For example, he wanted to push off the student loans till Christmas or beyond or whatever. Is that being ignored? Is there any teeth to that? There was a lot of legal questions whether he could do those things without congressional approval. So tell me what's the latest on that one.
There are legal challenges. I'm not going to bore you by going into each of them and the arguments on each. Clearly there is standing to challenge them, and they are challengeable because they are certainly questionable in legality, which is why we need Congress to act. Mitch McConnell needs to do his job because executive orders won't be an adequate substitute. And right now, we're seeing absolutely no practical result of these executive orders. Put aside the fact that they're legally questionable. They're having no real effect because there's utter and total confusion about what his unemployment insurance proposal is. It was $400 with a contribution of $100 from the states, but of course states can't afford it. So then he reduced it to $300. But how does that square legally with what the present system requires? And how can the states implement it in a state like Connecticut, which took weeks to implement the $600 program? So I think it is having no real practical effect in dealing with our economic crisis.
And he can't tell Mnuchin, which I think he did, to just put the hold on the payroll tax. You just can't do that, correct?
Well,
legally?
He can tell anybody anything, which he is wont to do. But it's words, not action. And Mnuchin does not have the power to unilaterally raid the Social Security fund, which in effect is what the order involves. He does not have the power to invade and raid a sacrosanct Social Security fund, putting seniors at peril simply to serve the whims of this president and his political ends. Nor does he have the power to unilaterally order spending that hasn't been appropriated by Congress, or shift money from one account to another, which will be the essence of the challenge.
I mean, the president is clearly obsessed with a payroll tax cut, which makes so little sense because it ends up helping folks who have a job when our focus right now should be on prioritizing helping people who don't have jobs. And as Senator Blumenthal said, it just robs Peter to pay Paul. It ends up taking money out of the Social Security system, further weakening that system in order to fund a payroll tax cut that economists tell you right now doesn't get a very big bang for the buck. I mean, the other problem here is that the president's interested in, executive orders rather than negotiating. The two most important people aren't in the room. Mitch McConnell refuses to be in the negotiating room, and Donald Trump spends all his time on Twitter and playing golf. If Mitch McConnell and Donald Trump were actively involved in these negotiations, we probably could have gotten them done by now. But instead, they're off focusing on other priorities, and the country is, ultimately being sacrificed. Anything else? All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.